I want you all to imagine for a second if you didn't have language. No speech, sign language, no thought, no writing, if you didn't learn and if you couldn't communicate. What would you think? Who would you be? Imagine living if you didn't have language. If none of your friends, your family, if no humans had language. Would you still be anything of who you are? Okay, now get your language back. But now I want you to imagine that you speak another language, completely different from the one you speak now. What would be different? How would you be different? And would you still think the same thoughts, perceive the same things the same way, or would you see the world differently? Around the world, there are about 6,900 living languages and 7.6 billion minds, each unique. But how different really is each one? Throughout this talk, I'm going to help you understand how the language you speak affects your perception of the world, how your perception of the world is influenced by language and culture, and how and why all humans are able to have grammar and language. Now, there's multiple ways to answer and think about how language affects us. You can think about language as a part of a culture, or language as a tool on its own of human creation, but you must combine both to get the full picture. To start, we'll take an anthropological view. There is the superior Whorf theory that says that the structure of a language determines a native speaker's perception and categorization of experience. But this theory is very defining and specific, so it's been debunked due to this. But recently, there has been some new research that supports some truth to this. Lero Boroditsky, a professor at Stanford University, recently conducted some of the first empirical tests on this. She also did a TED Talk on this. If you are interested, it's pretty good. You can check it out. Anyways, she tested and studied speakers in China, Greece, Chile, Indonesia, Russia, Aboriginal Australia, and America. One test she did was she asked people to arrange a series of images by time, like a tree growing. And the results were that English speakers arranged it left to right. Hebrew speakers arranged it right to left, and Aboriginals arranged it east to west, correlating to how time is talked about in each of their languages. The next test she did was she asked people, if this is today, then where would you put tomorrow, and where is yesterday? English people arranged it horizontally, like how we would say before and after in English, while Mandarin speakers arranged it vertically. Other similar experience showed similar results. This on its own shows correlation, or rather differences, between the language people speak and how they think about the world. The next question, or rather counter question from this, is are these differences caused by language or by another aspect of culture? To test this, she taught English speakers new ways of talking about time specifically, as in Mandarin and Spanish. And she found that their thinking started to resemble that of other languages. She found that when learning a new language, you're not simply learning a new way of talking, you're learning a new way of thinking. She also found that language meddles in basic aspects of visual perception, such as our ability to distinguish colors. Now, if you were to think about this simply logically, you would think just because someone has words for something that you don't, that doesn't mean that you both don't understand the things, right? Well, for a long time, this has never been tested. None of this has. But with Boroditsky, she finally did. And when she tested this, she found this logical assumption to be false. Now, Russian has two distinct words, for light blue and dark blue, while English has just blue. She found in tests that Russian speakers can differentiate faster than English speakers between light and dark, among other experiments. Through all of these tests, she found that people who speak different languages do think differently, and that even flukes of grammar can profoundly affect how we see the world. Another example of differences in simple grammar affecting perception is that it was observed in tests on languages with word genders that people associated inanimate objects with descriptive words that correlated to that gender, even though the word gender had no correlation with the actual object. Like the Spanish word for spoon, which is female, was associated with words like slender and smooth, while the word for fork, which is male, was associated with words like strong. Similarly, in German and English languages, the word death has the male gender, while in Russian and Spanish, it is female. This corresponds to how death is most often represented in art by speakers of those languages, as the Grim Reaper, a male figure in English and German art, and as Santa Muerte in Spanish art and a female figure in Russian art. Both of these examples show how language affects perception of concepts and art in ways that we don't even think about. So far, we've seen plenty of examples of how language affects perception. It seems that we can clearly see that language does affect perception, and people who speak different languages do think differently and perceive things differently because of language, right? Well, wrong. The most important thing to remember is that language is a part of culture. It's not really language that affects perception, but culture as a whole. You cannot possibly successfully separate language from culture because it is connected to all other parts of culture. Language is just not the whole picture. Now, enough of the culture versus language. Let's talk about something maybe a little more interesting. The actual formations of language and the human mind. Now, there's this great guy, Noam Chomsky. Side note, he is the best. You should all check him out. He's outspoken on foreign policy, democracy, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Pretty cool. Anyways, back to language. He was interested in how kids from all cultures are able to learn language so easily at roughly the same age. Now, language is so complex, and although you probably don't think so, since we speak it and it seems simple, just a few grammar rules and all that, it is. There's so much unconscious grammar, so many unthought rules, that's actually incredibly, incredibly complex. So, if language is so immense and complex, how is it possible for kids to learn any language, whatever they learn, with the very limited evidence that they have? Simply put, it would be impossible, unless there is something else, something that's innate, that's in our brains, that allows all humans, specifically children, to learn language. This is where the theory of universal grammar comes in, an idea not originally created by Chomsky, but improved and popularized by him, of innate biological grammatical categories, such as a noun category and a verb category, that facilitate the entire language development in children and in adults. Another explanation is that universal grammar is the system of principles, conditions, and rules that are elements or properties of all human languages, not merely by accident, but by necessity. Necessity of communication and evolution. If there was no universal grammar, then it would be impossible for me to stand up here and be able to talk grammatically correct English, because I would have to be thinking about it constantly, and even then, would never be right it. No you? So, children are able to rapidly learn, even though they have hardly any evidence or frame of reference to learn from, or hear as kids. Therefore, Chomsky says that this grammar must be innate. He actually found that the central nervous system and cortex are biologically programmed not only for the organization of physiological aspects of speech, but also for the organization of language itself. The capacity for organizing words into relationships of words to each other is inherent. So if we can know that there is possibly a base for all languages, universal grammar, coming from human evolution that allowed humans to develop languages, then the similarities between languages can tell us about universal grammar, and the differences between languages can tell us about how people evolved differently and what they all thought was more and less important. So with this, we can see that all the ways that languages are all different might be representative of the differences of perceptions and values of the people who developed and who speak those languages, like we saw in the examples at the beginning. Now, I want you all to imagine once again that you don't have language. Really try and imagine for me. Try and remove all words and knowledge of language and knowledge that comes from language from your mind for a second. Now, get your language back, and as you regain it, I want you to think about how it shapes you and your everyday perceptions and thoughts about the world. And from now on, when you meet someone new who speaks a different language, I want you to start to notice all the things that can make you different and all the things that can make you the same. Thank you.